Welcome back everybody to another MOTOBOB video, and you join me today at the BMW stand at Motorcycle Live for the unveiling of two very cool looking new bikes. On the one hand we've got the R12 Cruiser, and on the other the R12 NineT retro style roadster. Both looking absolutely fantastic, and these could be a great option if you're looking for a new retro style bike for 2024. And so in this video we'll go through all of the details that you need to know with a full walk around of the key features. But look, before we get into the details, a quick word on how these bikes fit into the current BMW lineup. With this, the R12 NineT, it pretty much replaces the existing R90 Retro, and that's been in BMW's range for a few years now, and I think it's been pretty popular. One of the things that really appeals about it is that it's a great basis for customization, and that's a big part of retro motorcycle ownership. And so with this one, I think they're going down the same route as well. It's something that they reference quite frequently in the press release and the marketing materials. This bike, on the other hand, the R12, is a bit of a new proposition for BMW, and you could either see it as like a cruiser style take on the R9T, or maybe as a smaller middleweight sibling to the large capacity R18s that they launched a couple of years back. Now I think with those bikes it's pretty obvious that the strategy for BMW was to broaden their sales in the very lucrative American market by building a bike that can go toe-to-toe with the large capacity Harley cruisers and tourers. This one though, being a 1200, I'd say it's more so a competitor for their middle range bikes like the Sportster or the Nightster, maybe even the Indian Scout or the Triumph Bobber. Either way, with both of these bikes you're getting an engine which is pretty much the same, I think, as the current R9Ts. So it's the classic BMW flat boxer twin. Yes, they've redesigned these rocker covers, so it does have a little bit of a different look from the outside, but the internal facts and figures are pretty much the same. So the bore and stroke's the same, and as a result you've got the 1170cc capacity. Even down to the power figures, you're looking at 109 horsepower peak at around the 7,000 RPM mark, and I think it's 114 newton meters of peak torque at sort of 6 or 6,500. So if you compare them like for like, they're pretty much bang on. I will say though, the R9T didn't massively need a big upgrade to the engine. It's got a really distinctive feel. You'd know it's a BMW if you were blindfolded riding it. It's got that sound and smoothness and the side-to-side rock, but also 109 horsepower is actually quite punchy for that retro end of the market. The closest competitor is probably the Triumph Speed Twin 1200, for example, and that makes 98 horsepower. So look, the R9T has always had this like 10% power advantage, and out on the road it does feel easily quick enough for some spirited road riding, and I'd expect this to feel absolutely the same. Now over on the R12 though, we do have slightly reduced figures, so this makes 95 horsepower peak. And look, when manufacturers make a cruiser version of one of their platforms, it's quite typical to tune it down a touch for more mid-range and low-end torque, and that's kind of what I was thinking they'd done here when I saw the headline power figures. But thing is, they included a dyno chart in the press kit which compares the two bikes, and actually they track almost identically up to about 75% through the rev range, and then that's where this bike just completely dies off. So it does look like they've actually just limited it at 95 horsepower. Now 95 horses is the maximum you're allowed before you can limit a bike down to 47 horsepower for A2 license holders, and so perhaps out of the two this is the bike that they expect to do better with newer and less experienced riders. Still a bit of a shame, because on paper a 109 horsepower midi cruiser sounds like a lot of fun, but still the rationale does make sense, and I'm sure BMW know more about what they're doing than me in terms of positioning their bikes. Now on the tech front, in terms of the dash, on this R12 NineT you've got the twin analog clock, so a speeder on one side, rev counter on the other side, and this will be entirely familiar if you've ever ridden an R9T. You also get some little digital inserts in there as well to manage some of the menus. The R12 on the other hand, well, it follows more so some of the R18 models in that it gets a single speeder in the middle there, although I do believe there's an option in the accessories catalogue to upgrade to also have a rev counter. Interestingly though, for both bikes there's a new digital display accessory which is 120 quid I believe, and basically it's a small, they call it a micro TFT, that's 3.5 inches, and so I kind of feel like they've taken inspiration from the custom scene. If you see a custom retro built on a bike like this, quite often they're fitted with something like a Moto Gadget dash which is really small and minimal. Plus it'll give you a little bit more functionality I guess, and I think for 120 quid that's a little bit less than I was expecting, so it's probably something I'd be speccing up on these particular bikes. Either way, through either dash you can manage the riding modes. So on this bike you've got rain, road and dynamic, and I'm guessing you can probably have a good stab at what they do. Rain will be the most docile for low grip conditions. Road is a little bit like a neutral mode in the middle. And then dynamic is going to give you the most punch and pep and sportiness. The R12, on the other hand, again follows the R18 with the naming convention, so you just get 2 modes on that one. Roll is the more chilled out one, and rock is probably akin to like dynamic on this bike. Within those, of course, you've got varying levels of power, but also you've got the dynamic traction control system and engine drag torque control, so that prevents rear wheel lockups on heavy deceleration or downshifts. Worth pointing out though that the Gear Shift Assist Pro accessory is available for both, which is their name for a quick shifter, and so if you are a little bit clumsy on your downshifts, you might want to take a good look at that one. Then you've got ABS, of course, and there are lots of options in the accessories catalog. You've got things like cruise control, hill start control, their emergency SOS switch, and a phone connectivity module that you can use Bluetooth to connect to your phone with, and that'll give you some control of the phone's features through the switchgear and dash. Now, if you do choose to go down that route, you'll be happy to know that there's a USB-C charging port on board to keep your phone juiced up if it's mounted on the bars, and also a 12-volt socket for any other accessories you might want to run. So it looks like a decent tech package all round, especially for a retro bike. But the key feature for me has to be that new digital dash, which I think is almost a must for me on this bike. Then again, some of you will probably still prefer analog needles. Let me know what you think down in the comments. Now look, one thing that is all new on these two bikes is the tubular steel frame. It's a complete redesign, and while they do briefly mention stuff like the weight of it and maybe how it affects the handling, the real emphasis is on versatility and interchangeability of parts. So you can fit a different bolt-on subframe with a different style of seating, it can accommodate different tank styles, and that means they can build multiple genres of bike on the same platform like the two bikes that we see on the stand here today. Then think back to the R9T, you had that air intake on the side of the tank. It was quite unusual looking, whereas now they've moved it into the traditional place under the saddle, and again I guess that's a feature that's going to make it easier for their designers to come up with different tanks that you can swap in and out. Also, it does have a bit of an effect on the looks of the tail of the bike. The R9T was very skinny, a lot of space here, and it looked kind of like custom inspired. These two bikes are a little bit more traditional, but I do like what they've done, and they've really, one of the biggest benefits in my opinion, tidied up this area of the bike. On the R9T it was a little bit cluttered with little steel tubes that go off in different directions. This looks a lot more clean and classic and cohesive. As for the rest of the chassis spec, well, on both bikes we've got a chunky 45mm upside down fork, and specifically on this R12 NineT model, which is of course intended to be a little bit more sporty in its handling, you've got full adjustability so you can get the damping absolutely dialed to your preference. Also here you've got a little bit more travel, so it's 120mm to the 90mm of the slightly lower slung R12. At the rear, of course, you've got the power lever shaft drive swing arm design, and joined to that we've got a new orientation for the monoshock at the rear. So instead of being vertical like on the previous gen, it's more diagonal or almost horizontal, and perhaps that's a change in order to accommodate that new airbox position. I believe it's preload and rebound adjustable on both bikes though, and again you've got 120mm of travel on this one, 90mm on the R12. Now 90mm might not sound like a great deal, but keep in mind that stuff like the Harley Sportster or the Indian Scout, they're way below that 40 or 50mm if I remember correctly, and so actually in that context 90 is quite generous. As for the braking, we've got a pair of radially mounted 4-pot Brembo branded calipers up front on dual 310mm discs, so nice and sporty. They look very similar actually to the previous gen R9T. The brakes on that bike perfectly good, so I'd expect these to be good as well. And then at the rear we've got a 2-pot caliper on a 265mm disc, so pretty big compared to most of the bikes, and I'd expect that to be decent in the power stakes too. But really the biggest difference between these two bikes would be the wheel sizes. As you'd expect with a sporty retro roadster like the R12 NineT, you'd want 17 inches front and rear for optimal road handling, and that's exactly what you get. The R12 on the other hand, well, that's more so concerned with the cruiser aesthetic, and so as such you've got a larger 19-inch front and then a slightly smaller 16-incher at the rear. As you'd expect, I think that's going to be to the detriment of handling. It won't be quite as quick turning as this bike, and also it's raked out a little bit more, longer wheelbase, so that's the one that's going to bias more towards stability than like nimbleness. As for the ergonomics, well, this is very familiar if you've ever ridden an R9T. It's classic naked retro stuff. You've got the flat and wide bars, a very neutral foot peg position, and then a moderate seat height. In fact, it's a little bit lower than the previous gen. It's 795mm versus 805. So good news if you're a little bit short in the leg and you like the look of this bike. but ultimately, yeah, no radical changes here. The R12 though, well, of course, it's lowering the seat at 756 millimeters, and also the bars feel a little higher and further back, so you've got that very commanding bar position. One thing to point out though is that you do get mid-position foot controls, and so if you're a cruiser buyer and you're looking for something with forward pegs so you can stretch out on the motorway, maybe this bike isn't going to be for you, because fundamentally that boxer twin layout is going to limit the ability to fit anything like that. Personally though, I absolutely prefer mid-position controls. When you're riding quicker, you can support your weight a bit more, and also if you've got rough road surfaces, you can get the weight off your bum and your spine. So this would be the one I'd choose, even if I had the choice between the two. As for the aesthetic side, well, the R12 NineT has changed quite a bit. I mean, fundamentally it's pretty much the same layout, but this new airbox position, the rocker covers, and also this tank shape, which they say is more inspired by their toaster tanks of yesteryear, you know, they do combine for a slightly different aesthetic. I'm not quite sure which I prefer, the old R9T or this one. I'd love to know from you guys in the comments how you rate it. Colors wise, you've got the black one, which is the most affordable option. It's still got the brushed aluminium knee pad areas there, but generally across the bike all black. This is slightly more, and this is a metallic green. Looks really good under the lights here. And then top of the range is their option 719, which is typically their most fancy spec. That one comes with an entirely brushed aluminium tank and then a red frame. For me though, I think it's got to be that black one. It's classic, you know, it's the most understated. And then I think if you spec it up with the spoke wheels, some of the option 719 billet parts, and also the bikini fairing that they showed in some of their press shots, it all combines for what I think is a very, very nice looking bike. However, this has really surprised me. On paper, an R12 doesn't sound that visually appealing to me, but I think it really does look very nice indeed. It's got a bit of a squat, sort of butch, midi cruiser type stance, and also I love the fact that they didn't go down the hardcore Americana route and make it look kind of cheesy. It still looks like a BMW. It looks like it's sort of trickled down from the R9T, and I mean that in a good way. Plus, this tank design is slightly preferable to me. It's a little sleeker. It is practically a little worse perhaps because it's 2 litres smaller, so that's 14 to the 16 of that bike. But I think for me it's a sacrifice I'd be willing to make because it looks really nice, and I also wonder if it is interchangeable between the two. Paint-wise, we've got a black base model as well. There's a red and black that's the next step up, and then this is the option 719, and it has to be my pick. You've got silver, metallic, gold sort of stripes around the edge of the tank, a little bit of black, and then gold on the bars. And these are the accessory tubeless spoked gold anodized rims, and they really finish it off. This is a bike that's definitely surprised me as to how much I like it, and I really think it might be the star of the show here at Motorcycle Live. Thing is though, if you're looking to buy one, the looks might not be the determining factor because there's actually a substantial difference in price between the two models. This one comes in at just under 12 grand, whereas the R12 NineT is well over 14k, so it's over a 2 grand difference between the two models. Now admittedly you do get the fully adjustable suspension, the twin clocks, there's some other features that I think will make it a better bike to ride perhaps, but it's still a big difference. And also compared to some of the competition like the Triumph Speed Twin 1200 or the Kawasaki Z900 RS, it does come up looking a bit steep. Those bikes are 11,795 and 11,799 respectively, so it really does have to be good out on the road to justify the price tag, and certainly it's one of the bikes that's right at the top of our list for bikes to review in 2024. We'll get hold of one as soon as we can, but in the meantime, let me know what you think of it down in the comments below, and how does it rate against some of the other retros that I mentioned? Does it look like the one that you'd purchase, or would you go for something else? Also, we've got a playlist on the screen now of all the new bikes that were announced a couple of weeks back at EICMA, so if you do want to see more new 2024 motorcycles, then I thoroughly recommend checking it out for the lowdown on all the best bikes. Hit subscribe if you've not already to see more of the latest motorcycle news like this. Many thanks for watching today, and we'll see you in the next one.